Okay, we are recording. So, welcome everybody. This is Keira's Lollipops, lesson 3, and I am Cindy Hambrick, and this is a shining needle class. And I am going to record this, and we'll put it out that you guys, so you guys can watch it again. I'll put it out on the YouTube channel, and I'll send a note to everybody letting them know where it is. So today, lesson is going to be starting tubular peyote. I know a lot of you all are very comfortable with doing tubular peyote, and so this will be a fairly quick lesson, but when you start tubular peyote, in fact, when you start most kinds of peyote, you string on the first 2 rows at the same time. So you always will be stringing on row 1 and 2, and your direction should tell you, should instruct you to do that. So on page 22, my stripe row 1 and 2, I put them together. I say to string on 48 gold beads. Now, so that you guys can tell the difference between the row 1 and the row 2 beads, I have chosen black beads to be row 1 and blue beads to be row 2. Now, if you were stringing these together, though, these would all be gold, and you're not going to be able to tell which one is row 1 and row 2 because they're all gold. But for purposes of this video, I want you to be able to see the difference. Then what I instruct you to do is to make a circle of all the beads, circle through all the beads again. And the reason I do that is because some people will have you just string on all the beads and then tie a knot to make a circle. Whenever I do that, I always mess it up. So for me, it's easier just to thread through all the beads again, then tie a little knot, because when you thread through them again, it's holding them all together. Then I tie a little knot, and the little knot keeps them from wiggling, the beads from wiggling on you and separating. Now, one thing I do when I'm before I tie my knot is I make sure I have a gap in my beads of about 1 bead length. The reason why is if you tie that knot so tight that your beads are all smashed up together, when you come to get into try and thread into those beads, you're going to have a lot of trouble. It's just going to be harder than it has to be. If you leave about a bead's worth of space, that gives you room to maneuver and get into the beads, and it'll just be easier to stitch. And if you're worried about there being that big gap showing, after about 3 or 4 rows, that gap disappears and you'll never know it was there. Now, one thing I do so I've set up my needle and thread. When you guys are beading along and you have to leave your project and you want to leave your needle on your thread, I always just tie a big knot at the end of my thread. That way my needle won't fall off. So that way I can come back and I know I've got my needle and it's not on the floor. So, but you have to remember to cut off that little knot. So I'm going to cut off my little knot, because otherwise you will have a lot of trouble beading. Okay, so we've got our little space. Now, I've said you can, for this project, you've got those wonderful acrylic tubes. You can put your beadwork that you've already made a circle with, put your beadwork on your acrylic tube. You get to leave the acrylic tube in there. If you're working with a wooden dowel, you're still going to put your beadwork on your dowel. The nice thing about dowels is that it keeps your beadwork nice and even, because you've got all of this surface area that is determining the size of your beadwork, not willy-nilly how loose or tight your tension is. So that's why I like working on dowels. If you don't like working on dowels, you really don't have to. But for the purposes of this demonstration, we're going to work on a dowel. Now I'm going to talk to you a little bit about dowels. If you're making an amulet bag and it's tubular peyote and you want that amulet bag to be very loose and pliable, what you want to do is find a dowel that's going to be slightly larger than the circumference of your circle of beads. And the reason why is because that larger dowel is going to force you to have more space in between all of these beads, and it's going to give that loose fabricy feel to your beadwork. Now, if you want your beadwork to be nice and stiff and hold up tight, and so that you can, you know, put your lollipops in here, and let's get this in the camera there, and you don't want it to, you know, buckle over, then you want you don't want as much surface area. You want the circumference to be smaller. So you would find a dowel that was just slightly smaller than your circle of beads, and then that will cause you, as you're beading along, to have a little tighter tension, and your stand will stand up nice and perky. So that's just a hint on how to pick dowels. All right, so we have done stripe row 1 and 2. We've strung on our 48 gold beads, and now we're going to go on to what a lot of people think is the hardest part of peyote beading, doing row 3. Row 3 is really simple. You just have to be patient and go slow. What you want to do is, our instructions tell us, pick up 1 red bead. You want to skip, oh wait, I forgot to tell you. Okay, after you tie your little knot, what you want, the instructions will tell you to thread through a certain number of beads. And so I'm going to go ahead and do that. All that does, you just thread through however many beads they said. That just hides your knot in that area of beads so that you can't see the knot. That's all that's for. It's so, okay. So my row 1 beads are black. My row 2 beads are blue. So we're going to start row 3. We're going to pick up a red bead. We're going to skip row, I think I just said that backwards. My row, okay, scratch that. My row 1 beads are blue. My row 2 beads are black. Sorry about that. So we're going to pick up a red bead. We're going to thread into a row 2 black bead, which in you guys' case is going to be gold, but for purposes of the demo, it's black. So you're not going to thread into the row 1 bead. You're going to thread into the row 2 bead. So I'm going to put, and then you pull tight, and you're starting to see it make that little offset. Okay, so I'm going to pick up another one. I'm going to skip the row 1 bead, and see how now that I have a little space in here, I can get into this row 2 bead really easily. So I'm going to put in that row 2 bead. The row 3 bead. Now, skip the row 1 blue bead, go into the row 2 black bead, and pull tight. And see how it's making that really nice little offset there. So you can see now we've got blue row 1, black row 2, red row 3. You can see that it's starting to make your pattern. So you just have to be careful and just go along slowly, and take your time doing this, because you've got to get this part set up correctly. Then the rest of it will go easily. Even if you make a mistake later on, it'll be easy to fix. But your first 3 rows, you got to get right. You can't, it's really hard to fix a mistake in the first 3 rows. So you got to get them right. So just go very slow. And since your gold beads, you're not gonna be able to tell which ones are row 1 and row 2 beads. So you just need to remember that you need to skip the bead that's in front of your thread. Here's our thread. This row 1 bead is in front of it. Skip that one and go into the next bead. Okay, so now, as we're going along beading, I'm going to give you guys a hint. When you're doing a larger project, as you're adding in these row 3 beads, sometimes they flip around on you and they go from one side to the next, and then you end up with a mess and you don't know where you are in your pattern. So a trick to keep them all upright where you want them to be is you go into that row 2 bead, and what I do, even though I went in at an angle pointing down, I'm going to take it now and pull it in the direction I want it to sit. I want it to sit up here, so I'm going to pull my thread up that way. And that makes it sit on top, because your beads want to go where your thread goes. I'm going to do that again. Even though I'm going in at an angle to get it in there, I'm going to go ahead and pull it up so that the bead will sit up. All right, so I'm going to continue going around here until I get around to the other side, and I'm going to show you guys how to do a step up. But you just keep going around slowly, patiently. You've got that little space in there, so it's not as hard to get your needle into the row 2 bead, and you just keep going around. So now we're getting around I'm just going to skip a few here, and we are all right, we're coming around to the end of our row. We're going to pretend like all of those have been done. I'm not going to make you guys watch me do it. Okay, so we're putting in our last bead. Okay, I'm going into the row 2 bead, and I'm going to pull it in, and there. Now, there is no room right here to add more beads. We've come to the end of the row, but we still want to keep beading because we haven't finished our project. So what you're going to do to step up to the next row is just, without adding a bead, thread through the first bead you added in row 3. And there you are. You're ready to start adding beads now to row 3. You've stepped up, and all peyote tubing, all peyote beading, you pretty much have to do step ups. So that's a real important concept to learn. And until you understand the concept of stepping up and are very familiar with it, do it in 2 steps so that you realize a lot of people will do both of them at the same time. They'll go through the row 2 bead and the row 3 bead at the same time. But till you get it cemented in your head, go ahead and do it in 2 steps so you can see how you finish off the row and then you step up to the next row. Now you're going to start adding row 3. This is regular tubular peyote beading. You just thread into the next bead that's sticking up there, and now you can just go along really quickly. Just keep threading in, and we'll do 4, and then you do 4 white ones, and it's going to start to make that little swirl. And that's all there is to starting and continuing tubular peyote beading. So you will continue now with the easy part until you finish all the way up to your fringe. And next week we will discuss how to do a stitch in the ditch and how to zip together your little how to zip together your roll, the roll that's at the top here, and then the stitch in the ditch to do this cute little fringy here. So I think that's all for today. I will go ahead and stop the recording.